So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephan Scholz. I used to work for quite a while for Siemens and Nokia, so almost 25 years. And then I joined Atrinet. The reason why I'm saying this is because I wanted to like to have a new kind of employment in a company where I can use my knowledge in the traditional network environment on the one side and have a company which has really an interesting solution to work on. And that's exactly what I want to talk today about, how to open up the complete legacy world to the NFV. So we have here a solution where you can reuse the complete legacy equipment on the NFV. And I want just to, wait a minute, wrong direction. So the way I want to present this is, first I want to cope a little bit with the challenge itself, and then talk on two things. On the first one is what is the real challenge here, describing in a bit more detail, and then showing kind of a tool or methodology on how you can achieve to solve this issue, which I try to explain in the first part. Let me start with two simple facts. Fact number one is, I guess, the digitalization is happening, and we all know now more, are quite sure on what is the future architecture looks like. It is clearly SDN NFV driven, so there is no too much discussion around this. I guess the advantages are just too important. However, we have a second fact that 99% of all the networks deployed so far are traditional networks. And even if you look at the deployments, they are still 95 to 98% traditional deployments. And as we had just heard from our previous speaker, somehow this VNF deployment has stuck a bit. I'm not arguing that it's going to stop at all, not at all, but we have to live with hybrid networks. Meaning with networks which consist on the one side of an NFV architecture, so NFV functions, and on the other side with a huge embedded base. So this is really the challenge, to bring those two worlds together. So what is the challenge here? That these hybrid networks can very much increase the complexity, and you need to take care, very careful in how you do this. To understand a bit better on what I'm talking, I try to kind of simplify the question which we are talking about here. You need to simply translate a service request, which is coming from the upper layer business systems, into an activation or configuration command, which then goes either to a cloud-based virtual network or to a legacy network. You can now argue whether it's exactly the way I have built this up here. However, in principle, it's the structure and how it goes. The service request here is decomposed, is first of all going in an overall service orchestration system, and then it's somehow decomposed in a model, the one or the other way, which I would call the service abstraction layer. In this, that's the area where you talk about Yang, about Tosca, about ONOS, ODL, and so on. And then this is done in a more or less automatic way. And those systems then are building up the configuration or activations files down to the real network. On the one side via the EMS, NMS systems, OSS systems, on the other side via the NFV orchestration machines. And that's how it's basically happened. So you have the second layer. So you bring in an additional layer. This is the kind of complexity you buy in if you want to go parallel. And what's happening is we see a couple of networks outside, instead of coping this, they're really starting up to build up parallel networks to not kind of coping with this challenge. So let me, before I start to go a little bit more into this challenge, rephrase a little bit on what are we trying to achieve. We are looking for a mechanism or tool which is capable to translate service requests into activation commands as fast as possible, as automated as possible, and independent of the underlying network vendors or the underlying network technology. So it should be technology agnostic and vendor agnostic as much as possible, because the traditional networks are often built from several vendors. So what is the first step we propose, or to manage hybrid networks? The first step is you need to discover from the network. You need to have an intelligent and accurate network-driven discovery understanding. You need, first of all physical devices which are in there. The devices, the modules, the ports, all logical resources, VLANs, the VRFs, and that's now very important, also the services which are on the network already. And this is a very, very important step. This needs to be network driven, because usually, in the usual case, and that's what I really can kind of testify from my long years experience, the inventories as they are usually not coherent with the current running network. There are several cases. You need to very quickly change a firewall, or customer is not happy what he has, so you establish a VPN. So they're just the inventory here and the network there. So first and very important step, and you cannot afford to have this kind of an inaccuracy when you try to manage hybrid networks, to be really 100% sure that what is in the network is in your inventory database. Therefore, it needs to be network driven. So you kind of harvest everything out of the network. This is the first, and I guess perhaps the most important step to manage those networks. So have a know-how on what you're talking about. What is your network in very detail? And I want to mention specifically the service part, because this is the hardest one, to really identify and collect all the services. So kind of a brownfield service discovery. Now once you have all information of your network, you can now do a couple of different things. You can start to redesign the services. You delete some of them. You onboard new equipment, specifically VNF equipment. And you delete the old equipment, the one which you want to get rid of, you want to replace. You activate the newly defining services and include in this activation, obviously, the newly deployed systems, like new type of VNF functions. So you migrate from old or legacy network you want to kind of get rid of towards new ones. You can do this step by step. In other words, with this, you have then really a transition somehow done. And that's very important. Your network is completely accessible to the new services in one consistent and automated manner. If you have, which I will show in a minute, an API-driven automation. So you can think about a couple of use cases. We have here some of them. So a typical use case would be inventory federation. So usually what is happening in the normal networks, you have an inventory of the traditional network, and even there you have several inventories for different vendors. And then you have what is happening also, that you have an inventory for the NFV, and by bringing them all together into one consistent database, you have a unified new inventory system. So this is one very important new use case. Another one is migrate from one vendor to the other. So you want to change out a vendor. You can, with this, if you have the complete network there, you do this in kind of designing the new services based on the newly brought in equipment. You activate the equipment, you redesign the services, You have them then moved over to the new equipment, and then in a second step, you can delete the old services and delete the rest of the equipment and take it out. So with this, and you can do this as a kind of a use case. Then another use case which we also see is, because what you usually discover when you have a good network and an intelligent network discovery, you find out that you have underutilized resources. We have made an estimation that up to 30-40% of the actual resources in the network are not used and not available to be used because it's not clear to the management system to use them. So getting much more out of your network, being legacy or being hybrid. Another use case which we just were inventing based on this is what we called Asdenization of legacy. And this is now, from my perspective, one kind of very exciting case because I haven't seen this concept so far. Here with this one, you really open up the complete embedded base of the legacy to an VNF type of orchestration. So you have a kind of an orchestrator. There are a couple around here, you know them. And you have EMS, OSS systems from the past. And you want the orchestration, you want that this orchestrator now is not only orchestrating the VNF part of your network, but also the legacy part. And the way how we do this is we have a multi-vendor SDN enabler. Let me try to explain you in brief terms. I do not want to become too technical, but try to explain in brief terms on how we do this. In principle, we have different vendors which are accessible over those type of interfaces. NetConf or Young, the newer ones. CLI is a typical, I guess that's 90%. Then you have a couple of them, SNMP, TL1, some REST APIs, SOAP, XML, even the small FTP protocol, small file transfer is used. So what we see is that we always, to kind of configure a certain service, you always have the same pattern of CLI or CLI commands or SNMP commands or TL1 commands. You kind of match them, you abstract them into network entities, and with this small Lego blocks, you can form a new service which we map to a Young model. At the end, you open up those traditional devices to Young NetConf model. That means you make it available for a typical SDN orchestrator deployment, be it ODL, ONAP, or ONOS, or whatever you have on top of it. So that's a very kind of unique type of feature or product which we have kind of, due to the experience we made with this huge legacy networks, which we kind of invented here. So let me come now to finalize on what I think are the real important topics for such a transition tooling, or I call it methodology, or call it platform. The reason why I'm calling it tooling is the following. I want, one important point is what we have understood is that the operators want to still be in control of the networks. They don't want to give it completely up. So it is important that they have a tool on how they can configure the important services and control them themselves. That's why I call it tooling, but you could also call it platform or methodology. So the key building blocks, I have just mentioned them here. You see here, by the way, this elephant. This elephant in the room is a little bit the kind of the legacy network. Here are all sitting the fancy NFVs, but in principle, you have a huge, huge elephant behind you, which is not used, and that's what we call the elephant in the room. So first is vendor agnostic, truly vendor agnostic, meaning not that I have one vendor, and by the way, I can a second one, and I can also integrate other ones if you want. But really being truly vendor agnostic, I will detail this in a second on what I mean with this. Enabling very fast onboarding, discovery, and activation of any multi-vendor infrastructure across traditional networks, what I call kind of flexibility, and then simplicity. Have a simple, clear path towards the new digital era. Let me start with the last one, with this simplicity. We think that you can really cut those layers to one. If you have a tooling which is capable to translate in a simple way the service request immediately into activation. You design the service in a way that the service itself immediately generates all the necessary configuration or activation demands, activation in case of the cloud-based network mainly, and configuration when it comes to the more legacy type of networks, and have this shortcutted. So we think that the service abstraction often brings a complexity which in certain networks might be necessary. I'm not saying that you can avoid this in any case, but in generally, it is possible to avoid this if it is not too complex, the network. So that's the simplicity. Coming now to the flexible, easy to use. So what do I understand? This kind of methodology or tooling needs to be understood from a person who is familiar with usual network operations within maximum 2-3 weeks of training. Anything above this is already too complex. So having a tooling where in 1-2 weeks you can train your network stuff to really handle this, that's what I understand, number one. Number two is the service modeling should be done completely codeless. So just using existing small Lego blocks with a click, point and click, drag and drop to build up the service. So that's very important. It needs to be codeless because we have seen several kind of solutions where you just add Java code or whatever it is if it comes to really complex network adaptations. The third point is the tool needs, or the methodology needs to take care that automatically all constraints and all policies like syntax, parameters, and so on is done. You need not to take care of this, otherwise you are stuck. And last not least, you need one consistent, simple GUI to handle all the different things you need. The device management for onboarding new devices, the service modeling, the service activation, all one simple unified GUI. Now, this was about flexibility. Last one is now vendor agnostic. Let me here be very specific. If you approach today's network, our experience shows that you have 6-7 vendors in there, 50 device types or device families, and 10 to 15 NMS, MMS models. That's roughly what the kind of mid to large size networks is all about, right? And to cover those, you need to have them, and as they are kind of, as you can see here, the list is huge. So I just want now to be a little bit more specific. We in Atrinet, we have more than 50 vendors onboarded, 1,000 device types, dozens of NMSs. We're just in the process, and every day we are getting more. So that's kind of evolving. This is the kind of the result of 15 years experience, which is all in this tool. And we need 1 to 2 weeks maximum to onboard one new device. That's what I would call truly vendor agnostic, because it is hard to find a new vendor which is not yet in our database. So we just had a huge project in APAC where we kind of applied this tool to a large operator, which a mixture of mobile. He has basically 3 networks, 2 different mobile and 1 fixed network, and he tried to bring this all together. Here we have roughly this order of magnitude. We had, I guess, all the vendors you can imagine in there, from the big, large ones, and 20 NMSs and so on. And we have all made the complete discovery for this network. So here you can see the full power of our 20 years experience. And with this, I want to thank you for your attention. And if you want to learn a bit more about this tooling and how it works, you can visit us on booth number 3, B3, I guess. But it is more than just visiting, just understanding the tooling. So thanks a lot.
Just one question from my side, which is how far along are you in terms of commercial use of this solution? Is it?
So we have now the first 7 vendors, so the first 7 operators where we have this in working. We have even one which is willing to kind of invite other other operators to come, because we cut it there. There are just three service guys which can manage all service for the complete network. We have 7 now. We are now, as we are a small company, it's a bit difficult to go into the large operators. We have now teamed up with a couple of system integrators. We have 3 or 4 large system integrators, which are very easy to use. And last not least, we have 5, 6, 7 vendors which are using this tool as a white label management system.
You hit my next question, which I won't go any more because we need to keep going. But my next was, how cooperative are the vendors in working?
They are very interested.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you very much.